I am not doing this video to chest thump. I am not doing this video to show how right I was, even though I will strongly make the point that I am right. I will strongly throw a spotlight around what I was saying before the election and what was going to take place after the election. And I was right that all of these lefties, all of these people who pushed for Joe Biden to get in office, all of these lefties, AOC, Bernie Sanders, all of these people that were willing to pretend that these task force was an actual task force to get something real accomplished, that pretended that they could push somehow Biden to the left. All of these lefties that pushed and cajoled and told other progressives and other people on the left that they had to vote for Joe Biden, and that after that vote, once they get across, then they're going to push him, then they're going to shove him. They're going to do something that they apparently was completely unable to do before the election when Joe Biden's fate was hanging in the balance. Somehow, they're going to get that accomplished after the election when they have zero leverage to do it. I told you that was farcical. And I absolutely was completely right. I'm going to show you buyer's remorse. I'm going to show you many of these lefties that are now talking about pushing Biden when, like I said before, the moment that you get out of the election, you lose all leverage. Your leverage in order to push Joe Biden, in order to get the Democratic Party to appropriate policy that you know is not just in the best interests of the country, it is not just doing it for strategic ends of trying to get a majority, but also because it is morally and ethically right. If you're in a situation where you're in a pandemic, when you're having people thrown out of their homes, the government has a philosophical responsibility, legal even, to ameliorate those rough edges. And that is not what the Democratic Party is doing. That is not what the Republican Party is doing, nor is that what a Joe Biden administration is going to be about. Status quo. Back to a third Obama period. And all of these lefties are now wringing their hands. All of these lefties with all the bravado in the world. Bravado when they have no capacity to extract any concessions. It's like calling up the guy who you owe a bunch of money to after you lose your job. Yeah, you can say all of that now, but when you had the opportunity to actually make a difference, when you had the opportunity to do something, to push the party, to extract concessions in real terms, not this theatrical nonsense, you didn't do it. You didn't do it. And it was me, lone voice, kept saying that the goal of pushing Democrats wasn't entirely for Joe Biden to lose. The goal of it was to get them to appropriate policy that wasn't, again, just in your interests from the standpoint of the left and trying to get that stuff accomplished, but was in the best interest of America as a whole. But you didn't do it. Cowardice. Instead, we needed patriots in order to push this stuff over the finish line. Instead, we get a party and a distribution of the political spectrum of cowards. And these cowards, after being beaten, maligned, put to the corner, ignored, used and exploited when necessary, they honestly, ridiculously expect the Biden administration to give them anything. You've been had. And it was obvious that you were going to be had. But this is one of those things sometimes where people try to convince themselves of things that are ridiculously not true. Because in their heads, they can find no other recourse outside of it. When Joseph Stalin was in a situation making the pact with Hitler, he didn't want that pact with Hitler. He fully understood that he was going to be attacked at some point. And so they gave the Nazis supplies in order to not create any provocations. He didn't even bring his troops in some kind of military position because he was concerned that the movement as such would create a provocation that may compel the Nazis to attack sooner than what they would be ready for. Even when he got word from his spies, they are going to attack you. Even when it's clear these guys were maneuvering, they're going to attack you. He wouldn't do it because in his head, he was stuck with the situation of not being prepared. It could be possible that elements of the left, be it Sanders, be it AOC, be it the Sunrise Movement, some of these other progressive groups, maybe they didn't think they were in a position in 2020 to take advantage of the situation. But whether you were in a position or not, I would argue that you were. It just took a certain degree of gumption, and it took a certain degree of fighting on behalf of policy. My assessment is that over the past 40, 50 years, the left has been so beaten down and used to not getting anything for its vote that even when they were put in a situation where they found out that the American public backed them, where you're in the midst of a crisis, where every crisis is an opportunity to get something done, you still shrugged from that challenge. You have a philosophical responsibility to look out for the interests of the public, cosmic even, because this is the political spectrum that is the conscience of this nation. And the fact that that part is willing to lay down, as opposed to being lions, is one of the most disturbing and sad aspects of the 2020 presidential election cycle. And fact is, all of these lefties that are wringing their hands right now, but back Biden in the primaries, back Biden in the general election, and wouldn't go after Biden, wouldn't push him to appropriate policy, and entirely bitten head down, ass cheeks wide open, and let him have his way. I'm saying that is the opposite of what should have taken place in 2020. And I hate to tell you this, that what you think you might have won in 2020 with dodging a bullet for having Trump getting a second term, you will not dodge that bullet when Joe Biden fails monstrously at any sort of big objective. And if he does, meaning if he does, then the question becomes, what does he have to show in the next presidential election? That's assuming Joe Biden even makes it to the next presidential election, that will keep him in that office. How do you justify yourself in that office if you cannot deal with the real material concerns of the public? And I have no expectation to believe Joe Biden will, especially looking at the people he's putting in his cabinet. The left will be exploited again, or have been exploited. The left, once again, are wringing their hands at Joe Biden, and the left is experiencing a certain degree of buyer's remorse, despite the fact that all of this is as obvious could be before the election. Welcome to an I Told You So soapbox. My name is Jamarl Thomas. This is the Progressive Soapbox. Guys, if you dig this content, please like, share, and subscribe. You can always support through PayPal or Patreon. I'm going to read a quote. This is from Biden's surrogate, and I would imagine probably somebody who's very close. They said close to Biden's campaign. I think this is Politico. I think we're at a fork in the road, said one Democratic operative in close touch with the Biden campaign. They can either continue to just beat the drums on the streets, or they can start to leverage the relationship they have. It's up to them which strategy they adopt. If all you do is escalate, then people eventually think that you're enemies and not friends. And they're like, we don't negotiate with terrorists, said Jeff Morales Raqueto, Democratic strategist who supports many of the left goals. Now, the first person was a Democratic operative close to Biden. The second person, and I'm assuming these are two different people that is making the thing, but basically, we don't negotiate with terrorists. Think about that. Think about that. Now, why is he saying that? Why is he saying that? He's saying that because he's trying to make the point that the left has been pissed off at some of Joe Biden's choices. Now, why would the left be pissed off at Joe Biden's choices? Because people like AOC and some of these other groups pretended as if they had some capacity to push Biden, despite the fact that logically, if you don't have the capacity to push him before an election, you damn sure are not going to have the capacity to do it after. And now they're wringing their hands. They're wringing their hands. This, just to make it clear, Biden's White House staff so far. Venture capitalist executive Ron Klein, former pharmaceutical insurance lobbyist Steve Ricchetti, top Democratic recipient of big oil Cedric Richmond. Oh, by the way, he is going to be the guy in charge of the climate stuff. Co-founder of the firm that represents big pharma and private equity, Jamarl Dillon. Now, fact is, I don't know why anybody was surprised. Despite the fact that Obama was attacking Wall Street when he got elected in 2008, Wall Street, Citigroup, based on the leaked documents, also picked his cabinet. So, despite the fact that he was bitching at Wall Street, Citigroup, Wall Street, ends up choosing the people who are going to help him make those decisions. If that took place in 2008, why the hell would you think it would be different in 2020 with a Joe Biden that has been in Congress or office for 47 years? It's a level of ludicrousness that jumps the shark to believe that Biden was going to do something different. And yet, all of these lefties set themselves on fire to tell you otherwise. Erin Brockovich wrote an article, I believe it was in The Guardian, attacking Joe Biden, basically saying, are you kidding? The guy who you're bringing into your administration was a guy who was dumping chemicals or fighting for companies that were dumping chemicals. Are you serious? You were talking about climate, and this is the guy who you bring into your position. Yes, that is exactly the guy he brings into this position. And frankly, what are you going to do about it? Go vote for the other guy. That's what Joe Biden will tell you. That's what Joe Biden told the other guy. Go vote for the other guy. Where are you going to go? And fact of the matter is, you probably voted for Biden, and you would vote for him likely again when they put up Tom Cotton or Ted Cruz against them. So why are you complaining now if at the end of the day you're still going to vote for him? You have the same situation. This person. Who is this? Is this guy familiar? Listen to what Sanders says here.
Lost. I would say, really, to answer your question, that we have too many Democrats who are not giving their constituents a real choice, in the sense of telling them that they are prepared to stand up in a very strong way for working families and take on very powerful special interests today who are doing phenomenally well while ordinary people are suffering. So I think what we need is to move the Democratic Party in a direction we're not in right now. Right now, let's be honest about it. Donald Trump has won a strong majority of working class people in this country. Now, you know enough about the Democratic Party that 40 or 50 years ago, that would have been a laughable idea. Am I right?
Absolutely.
And yet that's...
40, 50 years ago, that would have been a laughable idea that working class would have went to Republicans. And just to make that point that much more clear, go back and look at the congressional records in regards to who held the House. Democrats had the House for like 50 years, almost uninterrupted. 50 years. They had a dominant in regards to the working class public. Bill Clinton gets in office and the Congress gets wishy-washy, goes back and forth. The repeal of Glass-Steagall, deregulation of telecommunication. You get explosion of the prison population with those crime bills that Joe Biden was one of the people who were pushing out. You also get the destruction of welfare. All of this stuff is taking place under Bill Clinton, not to mention NAFTA. Democrats fundamentally betrayed the poor and the working class and looked them in the face and said, you have nowhere else to go. Those guys are monsters. What are you going to do? In which case, the same motif has taken place even now. Bernie Sanders, who's out here basically saying the Democrats had the House in perpetuity. Why did it change, Sanders? He explains it changed because their policies wasn't represent working people. Okay, Sanders, but you backed that party. You backed the party that wasn't representing working people. You told them that the task force was going to get something accomplished. Nothing is going to get accomplished. So if you full well believe that the Democratic Party lost access to the House because they weren't representing working people, then why do you turn around and back the party that doesn't represent working people and that continues to lose? How is that a winning strategy? If that's your case, if your case is that the Democratic Party, as the Democratic Party is, loses because it doesn't represent the interests of workers and the poor and basically the middle class, despite the rhetoric, liars, corrupt, captured by corporate interests. If you full well believe that, you backed Biden. You gave him cover with that task force. You acted as if you were going to be able to push him and that you were going to get something out of that. You got squat. And the point I'm trying to make here from a strategic standpoint, based on what you just said there, was that Biden and the Democratic policies over the course of these last years that basically offer squat Even in the case of situation like we have now, with all of these people out of jobs and all of these people being thrown out of their homes, that they lose because they don't offer anything. Then what is the best strategy, Sanders? To basically not push Biden, to not attack Biden, to not use the mob to try to get him to appropriate those policies that would bring people to their cause and would uplift the Democratic Party. No. Your policy that turned around and just backed Biden will have the effect of ending up in the same situation of a letdown. If indeed it is true that Democrats not backing the interests of workers is what lost Democrat access to the House, meaning owning it, what loses them the presidency, is the reason why they lost members of the House of Representatives and other people throughout the country for people who weren't necessarily backing Medicare for all or weren't backing the Green New Deal. If you full well believe that, then what is your justification for backing Joe Biden? How do you justify backing Joe Biden? How do you justify not going after and pushing him? Meaning even after you lost, how do you justify not using the 30 million people, forcing him to appropriate those policies by making the point to him that you will lose if you do not represent the interests of workers, and I myself cannot back you until you do? That is politics. That is using leverage to compel people, Joe Biden and the Democratic Party, to appropriate those policies. And doing so, by the way, based on the logic that you're using here, would have been in the best interest of not just America as a whole, but also in the best interest of ensuring that Democrats win. That's not what you did. That's not what you did. Now they're calling you terrorists. Here is another radical, somebody who I greatly admire. But listen to this radical who was also bent in the Forum. Cornel West. Even at the People's Forum, West basically might have wanted something different, but he was bent in the Forum by the mechanics of the political process, still terrified also of one Donald Trump. He believes that this could be a third Biden presidency or a third Obama presidency. And the question becomes, even if it is, what are you going to do about it? And if at the end of the day, even you that would complain, that would bitch, that would moan, that would go after Obama full-throatedly, even if you can be bent in the Forum, depending upon the opposition, then none of this matters. You have no leverage. The leverage that you had at your disposal was getting them to potentially fail and having them full well understand that they would fail if they are not representing the interests of the American public and being willing to let them do so. There needs to be some levels of existence you're willing to accept, not because it's great, but because you don't change or you can't change the political device otherwise. If the Democratic Party can always use this level of cowardice and fear-inducing aspect to get you to compel, to bend you into form, then in perpetuity, that particular situation can exist. Every 4 years, there will be another monster waiting in order to bend you and other radicals into form. Your challenge, your task, the only way out of this is to galvanize the will of the public. If you are stuck in the political device where you are only working within the context of the tools to which you are given, then you exclude the masses. I'm making the point that your pathway to victory is with the masses, not through these political institutions. And one of the pathways through that is you get our vote when you represent our interests. I don't say it because it's cute as a phrase. I say it because it should be true. It is our responsibility to hold our political leaders accountable. And that accountability, in some respects, meaning they fail. And they need to full well, from bone to flesh, understand that you are willing to allow them to do so. Under this, guys, coming back after the fact saying we got to hold them accountable when you have zero to hold them accountable with is a pointless endeavor.
I'm convinced that the Biden-Harris presidency could very well be a third Obama presidency.
Just so I'm clear, when were you convinced of this? Before or after you voted for him?
And the last thing we should do is commit the major mistake of not being vigilant in the ways in which that Biden-Harris presidency captive to the Wall Street greed and Pentagon militarism and relative silence on mass.
Now, my point here is, you're right, yes. But you voted for that. You went to the polls and pulled the lever for that militarism, for that mass incarceration, for that warmongering, for that greed and Wall Street. You voted for all of that. And you told people to vote for it. And I understand going after the fact, you felt like it was this kind of Hobbes choice where there was damned if you do, damned if you didn't. But abdication was a choice. Not participating was a choice. Yes, it's not a great brick to use, but it is a brick. And I understand that one individual can't necessarily do it by themselves. I understand Donald Trump comes across as a maniac. I understand all that stuff. I get the consequences of Trump winning that re-election, but that does not mean that you give up this responsibility to not hold your political leaders accountable. We have an inversion of politics in this country where people throw themselves at the politician as opposed to hold the politician accountable with the thought that they can lose. Until you get there, nothing changes. Until you get there, the militarism, the Wall Street, all of that stuff, the vagaries of poverty will remain ensconced because ultimately you would have some lefties, a majority, that are willing to go out and vote for those vagaries of our society, as opposed to being willing to fight and stand under the guidelines of policy. What should have happened in 2020 was every last lefty, every last group, the moment that they realized that their policies were the most popular across the board, even if Sanders lost, the response should have been, you get our vote when you represent our interests to the tune of tens of millions, followed by, is the Democratic Party really going to tank it to a man who they call the apocalypse just to prevent the appropriation of these policies? Are they going to fight for their constituents, meaning the billionaire class, that fervently, even against the majority of the American public that wants these policies? Is this really what that party is? Those are the grounds to which you fight. If they're going to make the argument that Donald Trump is uniquely evil, then it's also true that the idea that you're willing to tank it to a man who's uniquely evil is a problematic position to hold. Lefties, turn tail, spread cheeks. At some point, you're going to realize that that level of politics, this subservience of sorts, is not politics. It's not politics. And that what you've been taught, based on the actions for the past 40 years, is not politics. It's acquiescence. I get it. These guys are monsters in some kind of way. But the Democratic Party aren't saints. It's not one or the other. It's both. And these parties have been basically running a scam. I'm making the point that says, I'm done. And until you get to the point where you're done, nothing changes. The reason I'm doing this video is because I want to make this point that all of these lefties that are wringing their hands right now, and AOC, she's no different. AOC, I have time today because I'm sick and tired of seeing powerful people with both hands deep in the cookie jar turn around and tell people there's nothing there for them in our country's future. It's rank hypocrisy and corruption, incompetence at best. We shouldn't tolerate it. But you tolerated it because you told people to vote for Joe Biden. You told people to vote for Biden. You did that. So how is it we shouldn't tolerate it? You tolerated it. You voted for it. You told people to vote for it. In fact, you went further. When that article came out saying after the election that you felt that you were being maligned and basically attacked by your party, and that they saw you as the enemy, while simultaneously telling people that you believe that you could push Joe Biden on the Green New Deal, something that at this point is just laughable. Look, I don't like doing a video where I go after lefties, but I'm making the point that those lefties push Joe Biden before the election, acted as if Joe Biden was going to do something that he wasn't necessarily going to do and that there was nothing to indicate that he was going to do. And now wring their hands, feeling exploited and had, when it was very clear in the beginning you were going to be had. I do this video so in the future, when another election comes around, that people aren't necessarily shocked and bewildered, feeling, we've been betrayed. Nobody betrayed you. Nobody betrayed you. Joe Biden was Joe Biden. You voted for it. You pushed for it. Don't wring your hands now, after the fact, when you had another alternative that could have taken place. Yeah. All of these guys are wringing their hands now. Oh, Joe Biden did this. Joe Biden did that. Joe Biden was going to be Joe Biden. It was very clear what Joe Biden was going to be the entire time. So I don't want to hear this nonsense of these guys wringing their hands all of a sudden, shocked that Joe Biden was going to put in these Wall Street donors or these Republicans into those positions. You voted for it. Own it. Like, share, and subscribe.